You've heard the slogan a million times. My body, my choice. It's been screamed at protests, printed on signs, plastered across social media. It's the rallying cry of the abortion movement, the fundamental claim that women have absolute autonomy over their bodies and the government has no right to interfere. Except that's a lie. Because apparently my body, my choice only applies when you're choosing to murder a baby. When it comes to literally anything else, the left has no problem with the government forcing medical procedures, mandating injections, or, in the case we're going to talk about today, authorizing law enforcement to physically restrain you while they jam a needle in your arm to extract your blood. On January 1st, 2026, Tennessee implemented one of the most invasive DUI laws in the country. It explicitly authorizes law enforcement to use reasonable force to obtain blood samples from suspected impaired drivers. That means if you refuse a blood test, even if the officer gets a warrant, they can now physically hold you down while a nurse draws your blood. Your body, their choice. Now, I need to be very clear about something before we go any further. I am absolutely against driving under the influence. If you get behind the wheel drunk or high, you're putting innocent people at risk, and you deserve whatever consequences come your way. This episode is not about defending drunk drivers. This is about the principle of bodily autonomy and the dangerous precedent being set when the government can authorize forced medical procedures. Because here's what should terrify you. If the state can use physical force to extract blood for a DUI investigation, which is often just a misdemeanor, what's to stop them from expanding that power? What's the limiting principle? Where does it end? The same people who scream "my body, my choice" when it comes to abortion are completely silent about this law. The same activists who claimed that vaccine mandates were bodily autonomy violations have nothing to say when the government literally holds you down and sticks a needle in your arm. This is about hypocrisy. This is about selective outrage. This is about the left only caring about bodily autonomy when it serves their political agenda. And we're going to break down exactly how this law works, why it's dangerous, and what it reveals about the complete moral bankruptcy of the My Body, My Choice movement.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to awaken America.
Let me walk you through what actually changed on January 1st, 2026 in Tennessee's DUI enforcement laws. Because most people have no idea what they've signed up for just by having a driver's license in this state. Tennessee, like every other state, operates under something called implied consent. The legal theory is that driving is a privilege, not a right. And when you get your driver's license, you're entering into a contract with the state. In exchange for the privilege of driving, you agree to submit to a chemical test if there's probable cause to believe you're impaired. That's always been the framework. You refuse the test, you lose your license for a year. That was the penalty. A civil administrative action, not a criminal charge. You weren't going to jail for refusing, but you were losing your driving privileges because you broke the contract. The new law changes everything in three major ways. First, the penalty for refusal has increased dramatically. It used to be 1 year license revocation for the first time refusal. Now it's 18 months. And here's the critical part. You can now be charged with both DUI and the implied consent violation, even if eventually they get your blood via warrant. Previously, if you refused but the police got a warrant and took your blood anyway, you might avoid the refusal charge because the state technically got what they wanted. Now, you get hit with both charges. The DUI based on the blood results and the refusal charge based on the consenting initially. Second, they've added saliva testing to the mix. Cops can now swab your mouth during a roadside stop. These saliva tests are being used as preliminary evidence to establish probable cause for a blood warrant. And if you refuse the saliva swab, same 18-month license suspension. But here's the part that should alarm everyone. Regardless of how you feel about DUI enforcement, the law now explicitly authorizes the use of reasonable force to obtain blood samples. Let me read you the actual language. Law enforcement and medical practitioners are authorized to use reasonable force to obtain a blood sample from a suspected impaired driver if that person is uncooperative. Think about what that means in practice. An officer can physically restrain you. They can hold you down. They can use handcuffs, physical holds, whatever force they deem reasonable to keep you still while a nurse or technician inserts a needle into your vein and extracts your blood. This isn't theoretical. This is actually happening. Counties across Tennessee are setting up systems to implement this. Some larger counties like Davidson, Shelby, and Hamilton have medical wings in their jails specifically for this purpose. They're staffing these facilities with nurses whose job it is to draw blood from people who don't want to give it. And here's something even more disturbing. Some departments are exploring blood draw vans. Mobile units that can come to the scene so they don't even have to transport you to a medical facility. They can restrain you and take your blood right there on the side of the road. Now, the law does require a search warrant in most cases. They can't just grab you and start drawing blood without judicial approval. But once that warrant is issued, you have zero say in what happens next. No additional consent is needed. You don't get to sign a waiver or refuse on medical grounds. The warrant gives them legal authority, and the new law gives them the physical authority to make it happen by force. The statute specifically lists who's authorized to perform these draws. Physicians, registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, clinical laboratory techs, licensed paramedics, EMTs who are approved to establish IV catheters, and phlebotomists. And all of these people are granted immunity from civil and criminal liability, except in cases of negligence. Think about that immunity provision. If they botched the draw, if the needle breaks, if they hit an artery instead of a vein, if you get an infection from a non-sterile environment, you have almost no recourse unless you can prove they were negligent. And proving medical negligence is extremely difficult and expensive. The law also specifies that medical practitioners can only refuse to perform the draw if they believe it would jeopardize your life. So if you're struggling so violently that the needle might break off in your arm, they can refuse. But short of that, they're expected to proceed. This is state-sanctioned battery. That's what we're talking about. The government has authorized the use of physical force to perform a medical procedure on someone who is refusing consent. In almost every other context, that would be considered assault. But because it's being done to collect evidence for a DUI investigation, it's suddenly legal. And here's the practical reality of what this looks like. You get pulled over, the officer suspects you're impaired, they ask you to take a breathalyzer, you refuse, which is your right, they call for a warrant, the judge signs it, now you're being transported to a jail or a medical facility. You still don't want to give the blood. Maybe you're scared of needles, maybe you have religious objections. Maybe you just don't trust that the evidence will be handled properly. It doesn't matter. The warrant says they can take it. Officers hold you down. Maybe they put you in handcuffs. Maybe they use physical holds to keep your arms still. A nurse approaches with the needle. You're still resisting, pulling away. They use more force. They hold you tighter. And then the needle goes in, whether you consent or not. Your body, their choice. The locations where this can happen are expanding too. It used to be mostly hospitals and emergency rooms. Those are still the most common locations for safety reasons. But now, many counties have decided or have dedicated facilities in their jails or in their booking centers. Some have sobering centers staffed specifically for blood draws. And the controversial interpretation that's emerging is that draws can happen in any safe environment if you have a licensed practitioner present. That patrol car I mentioned, that's being explored as an option in some departments. As long as you have a paramedic or phlebotomist on the scene, they can argue the environment is safe enough. This is mission creep in real time. It starts with hospitals and medical facilities, then it's jail medical wings, then it's mobile vans, then it's the side of the road. Each expansion seems small and reasonable in isolation, but taken together, it represents a massive increase in state power to violate bodily autonomy. And all of this is happening under a legal framework that calls this a civil matter rather than a criminal one, because it's administrative, because it's about your driving privileges rather than criminal punishment. The state argues that normal constitutional protections don't fully apply. But here's the problem with that argument. When the penalty for refusing is now more severe than the penalty for first-time DUI conviction, 18 months for refusal versus typically 12 months for a DUI, it stops being a civil administrative action and it starts being a punishment. And if it's a punishment, it should trigger all the constitutional protections that come with criminal proceedings, including the right to a jury trial. Defense attorneys are already making these arguments in court. They're challenging the law as punitive rather than remedial. They're arguing that the use of force violates Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure. They're raising due process concerns under the 14th Amendment. But those challenges take time. And in the meantime, this law is being enforced. People are being physically restrained and having their blood drawn against their will. The precedent is being set. The normalization is happening. And the question we should all be asking is, if the state can do this for a DUI, what else can they do it for? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's address the absolutely staggering hypocrisy of the My Body, My Choice movement and their complete silence on this Tennessee DUI law. For decades, we've been told that bodily autonomy is sacrosanct, and that the government has no right to tell you what you can or can't do with your own body. That any interference with your physical person is a violation of your fundamental human rights. Except, apparently, that only applies when you're talking about abortion. Because I don't hear a single peep from the people who screamed about bodily autonomy during the vaccine mandate debates. I don't see any protests from the activists who claimed masking them to wear masks was tantamount to tyranny. I don't see any outrage from the feminists who built their entire political identity around the slogan, "My body, my choice." Where are they? Where are the think pieces about how Tennessee is violating bodily autonomy? Where are the lawsuits from the ACLU arguing that forced blood draws are unconstitutional? Where are the politicians who grandstanded about government overreach when it came to COVID restrictions? Silence. Complete and total silence. And you know exactly why. Because my body, my choice was never actually a principle. It was always just a slogan to defend one specific thing: abortion. They don't actually believe in bodily autonomy. They believe in abortion on demand. And they'll use whatever argument is convenient to defend it. When bodily autonomy works as justification, they'll scream about it from the rooftops. When it doesn't serve their purposes, they'll ignore violations of that principle that are far more clear-cut than anything they've ever protested. Let me be very clear about the comparison I'm making here. When we talk about abortion and bodily autonomy, we're talking about a situation where there are two bodies involved: the mother's body and the child's body. The pro-life argument is that the child's right to life takes precedence over the mother's desire to end that life. You can disagree with that position, but you can't deny that there's a competing interest at stake. But when we're talking about forced blood draws for DUI and DUI investigations, there's only one body involved: yours. There's no second person whose rights are being balanced against yours. It's just you and the state. And the state is saying, we're going to hold you down and extract your blood whether you consent or not. That's a far more clear-cut violation of bodily autonomy than anything involving abortion. And yet, where's the outrage? The feminist organizations that filed countless lawsuits over abortion restrictions have nothing to say about Tennessee authorizing police to physically restrain people for medical procedures. The activists who claimed that vaccine mandates were bodily autonomy violations are silent when the government is literally sticking needles in people's arms by force. Why? Because it's not actually about the principle. It's about the politics. They support abortion, so they'll use bodily autonomy arguments to defend it. They don't care about DUI enforcement one way or the other, so they're perfectly fine with the government violating bodily autonomy in that context. The selective application of principles isn't principled at all. It's just partisan hackery dressed up in moral language. And let's talk about the specific absurdity of this. The left has spent years arguing that government shouldn't be able to tell women what to do with their bodies when it comes to abortion, even late-term abortion, even partial birth abortion, even situations where the baby could survive outside the womb. My body, my choice applies in all circumstances, we're told. But apparently the government can absolutely tell you what to do with your body when it comes to extracting evidence for a criminal investigation. Apparently, physical force to jam a needle in your arm and take your blood is perfectly fine. Apparently, holding you down against your will to perform a medical procedure doesn't violate any principle as long as it's for law enforcement purposes. How come it's only my body, my choice when it's about murdering babies? How come bodily autonomy only matters when it's being used to defend one thing, or the one thing the left cares about? If bodily autonomy is really a fundamental principle, it should apply consistently. You shouldn't be able to pick and choose when it matters based on your political preferences. Either the government can force medical procedures on people, or it can't. Either bodily autonomy is sacrosanct or it isn't. But the left doesn't think in terms of consistent principles. Hell, they don't think at all. They think in terms of outcomes. Abortion good, therefore bodily autonomy arguments apply. DUI enforcement neutral or good, therefore bodily autonomy arguments don't apply. It's that simple. It's that cynical. And the most infuriating part is that they still claim the moral high ground. They still present themselves as the defenders of civil liberties and human rights. They still lecture conservatives about respecting people's choices and autonomy, all while supporting a law that authorizes police to physically restrain you and extract your blood by force. The cognitive dissonance should be overwhelming, but it's not, because they've never actually believed in the principles they claim to champion. Those principles are just tools to achieve political goals. When the tool is useful, they use it. When it's not, they ignore it. This is why so many people have lost faith in the left's moral arguments, because we've seen this pattern over and over again. They'll invoke freedom of speech when it's speech they like, but support censorship of speech they don't. They'll invoke bodily autonomy for abortion, but support vaccine mandates. They'll invoke religious freedom for Islam, but attack it for Christianity. They'll invoke equality under the law, but support different standards based on race and gender. None of this is principled. All of it is cynical, political maneuvering dressed up in moral language. And the Tennessee DUI law is just the latest example. A clear, unambiguous violation of bodily autonomy principle that they claim to hold dear. And where's the response? Nowhere. Because it doesn't serve their political interests to care. Meanwhile, conservatives who actually do believe in limited government, who actually do think the state's power should be constrained, who actually do care about constitutional protections, we're the ones raising questions about this law. We're the ones worried about the precedent and mission creep and the expansion of state authority. Not because we want drunk drivers on the road, but because we understand the government power, or that government power once granted is never voluntarily given back. We understand that if you authorize forced blood draws for DUI, eventually that authority will be expanded to other contexts. We understand that reasonable force is a standard that can be stretched to justify almost anything. We're consistent in our principles. We don't want the government to have unlimited power over your body, whether that's mandating vaccines, forcing blood draws, or regulating abortion. We think there should be limits on state authority. We think bodily autonomy matters, actually matters, not just when it's politically convenient. But we're the ones called extremists. We're the ones accused of not caring about public safety. We're the ones who get lectured about compassion and civil rights by people who support holding citizens down and extracting their blood by force. The hypocrisy is breathtaking, and it needs to be called out loudly, repeatedly, until people are screaming, "My body, my choice," are forced to confront the fact that they don't actually believe it. Let's talk about why this law is so dangerous, even if you think drunk drivers deserve whatever they get. Let's talk about the precedent being set and where this road leads if we don't pump the brakes. The fundamental problem with the Tennessee DUI law isn't that it targets drunk drivers. The fundamental problem is that it establishes a principle: the government can use physical force to extract biological evidence from your body for criminal investigations. Once that principle is established, once that precedent is set, what's the limiting factor? What stops the legislature from expanding that authority to other crimes? Right now it's DUIs, but DUIs are often misdemeanors, especially for the first-time offenders. If the state can use force to extract blood for a misdemeanor, why not for felonies? Why not for any crime where biological evidence might be relevant? Suspected of rape? They can take your DNA by force. Suspected of assault? They can take your blood test, or take your blood to test for drugs or alcohol in your system. Suspected of being at a crime scene? They can take biological samples to compare against evidence. The precedent is set. The authority is established. All that's left is expanding the list of crimes where it applies. And here's the thing about government power: it never stays limited to its original purpose. It always expands. Mission creep is inevitable because there's always another problem to solve, always another justification for using the power in new context. We've seen this pattern before. The Patriot Act was sold as a tool to fight terrorism. Now it's used for all kinds of domestic law enforcement. Civil asset forfeiture was supposed to target drug kingpins. Now it's used to seize property from people who never charged with crimes. Red flag laws were supposed to prevent mass shootings. Now they're being used to disarm people based on accusations without due process. Every single time the justification is reasonable, every single time the stated purpose is limited, and every single time the power expands beyond what was originally contemplated. The Tennessee DUI law is following the exact same pattern. It's being sold as a way to catch drunk drivers who think that they can avoid consequences by refusing tests. That sounds reasonable. Who's against catching drunk drivers? But the mechanism being used, authorizing physical force to extract biological evidence, creates authority that can and will be expanded. Because once you've established that the state can do this for DUIs, the argument for doing it for other crimes becomes much easier. And it's not just about expanding it to other crimes. It's about normalizing the idea that your body is a container for evidence that the state can access by force if they have the right paperwork. That's a fundamental shift in how we think about the relationship between citizens and government. It moves from the government can compel cooperation under threat of penalty to the government can physically violate your bodily integrity to get what it wants. Those are very different concepts. And the second one should terrify anyone who cares about limited government and individual liberty. Let's talk about the practical dangers too, not just the philosophical ones. Forcing medical procedures on resisting individuals is inherently dangerous. People get hurt, needles break, veins get blown, nerves get damaged, infections happen, especially in non-sterile environments. When someone consents to a blood draw, they cooperate, they hold still, they let the practitioner find a vein. The process is quick and relatively safe. When someone is being physically restrained against their will, everything is harder. They're moving, they're struggling, the practitioner has to work faster with less precision. The risk of complications goes way up. And remember, the practitioners performing these draws are granted immunity except in cases of negligence. So unless you can prove that they screwed up badly enough to meet the legal definition of negligence, you have no recourse if something goes wrong. You could end up with permanent nerve damage from a botched draw. You could get an infection from a non-sterile environment. You could be physically injured during the restraint process. And your legal options are extremely limited because the state has specifically granted immunity to the people doing this to you. That's a feature, not a bug. The law is designed to encourage practitioners to perform these draws by shielding them from liability. It's designed to remove any hesitation they might have about using force on resisting individuals. Defense attorneys are already raising these issues in courts. They're arguing that force draws in non-clinical environments creates unreasonable risk. They're arguing that the use of force can constitute excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment. They're arguing that the entire framework is unconstitutional. But those legal challenges take years. They have to work their way through the court system. They require test cases where someone was actually harmed. And in the meantime, the law is being enforced. The precedent is being set. The normalization is happening. Think about what we're teaching the next generation. We're teaching them that the government can hold you down and extract your blood if they have a warrant. We're teaching them that reasonable force is an acceptable standard for medical procedures performed against your will. We're teaching them that bodily autonomy doesn't actually mean anything when the state decides it needs something from you. Those lessons don't stay confined to DUI enforcement. They shape how people understand the proper relationship between citizens and government. They shape what people think is normal and acceptable. And once a generation grows up thinking it's normal for police to physically restrain people for blood draws, expanding that power to other contexts becomes much easier. Because it's not shocking anymore. It's not outrageous. It just shows how things work. This is how liberty dies. Not in one dramatic moment where the government openly declares itself tyrannical, but in incremental steps where each expansion of power seems reasonable in isolation, but taken together, they fundamentally transform the relationship between citizens and the state. The Tennessee DUI law is one of those steps. And if we don't push back now, if we don't draw a line and say this is too far, we're going to wake up one day in a country where the idea that the government needs your consent to perform medical procedures seems quaint and outdated. Your body will belong to the state. Not legally, they won't phrase it that way, but practically. When they can take what they want from you by force, when they can override your refusal with physical violence, what's the functional difference between that and ownership? This has to be stopped. Not just because of what the law does now, but because of what it enables in the future, because of the precedent it sets, because of the authority it establishes. And it has to be stopped by people who actually believe in limiting government power, because the people who claim to care about civil liberties and bodily autonomy have proven they won't lift a finger unless it serves their political agenda. So, what do you do if you find yourself dealing with this law? What are your options if you're pulled over and facing a potentially forced blood draw? And more importantly, how do we fight back against this dangerous expansion of government power? Let me start with the immediate practical advice. I'm not a lawyer. If you're pulled over on suspicion of DUI in Tennessee, understand what you're facing under the new law. The officer is going to ask you to submit to testing. You have the right to refuse, but understand that refusal now comes with an automatic 18-month license suspension, even if they eventually get a warrant and take your blood anyway. If you choose to refuse and they get a warrant, the blood draw is happening whether you cooperate or not. At that point, your best option is to comply under protest. Tell them clearly that you do not consent, that you're only cooperating because you're being forced to cooperate, and that you want everything documented. Ask if there's a body camera for the body camera footage. Ask if the blood draw is being recorded. Make sure there's evidence of exactly what happened, because that's going to be critical if you later challenge the draw in court. If they use force, if they physically restrain you, document everything. Note who was involved, what kind of force was used, where the draw took place, who performed it, what their qualifications were. Get medical attention afterward if you have any injuries, and make sure those injuries are documented. Because here's the thing, the law might authorize reasonable force, but what constitutes reasonable is going to be litigated in court. If they hurt you, if they used excessive force, if they perform the draw in an unsafe environment, your attorney can challenge whether it meets legal standard. Defense attorneys are already compiling checklists of questions to ask and issues to raise. Was the warrant properly served and explained before force was used? Is there video evidence of the entire process? What were the specific qualifications of the person who drew the blood? Was the environment medically appropriate, or did it create unnecessary health risks? Did the medical practitioner express any hesitation about the safety of proceeding? All of these factors can be used to challenge the admissibility of the blood evidence. And if the evidence gets suppressed, the DUI charge often falls apart. But beyond the immediate legal strategies, we need to fight this law at legislative and the political level. This law specifically, HB 1204 and SB 1400, was passed by Tennessee General Assembly. That means it can be repealed or amended by the same body. Contact your state representatives. Let them know you view the reasonable force provision as a violation of bodily integrity and a dangerous expansion of government power. Politicians respond to pressure. If enough constituents make it clear that this law is unacceptable, that it's going to cost votes, legislators will start reconsidering their support. Find out who sponsored the bill, who voted for it, and let them know you'll be voting accordingly. Support organizations that are challenging this law. The ACLU of Tennessee, despite their silence on bodily autonomy hypocrisy I talked about earlier, is monitoring these laws. The Tennessee Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers is the primary organization providing the legal backbone for challenges in court. These organizations need funding to bring test cases, to hire expert witnesses, to appeal decisions all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court if necessary. If you want this law struck down or limited, support the people that are doing that work. Public awareness is critical, too. Most Tennesseans have no idea this law exists. They don't know that implied consent has been escalated to physical force. They don't know that refusing a test now means an 18-month suspension. They don't know that blood can be drawn in jail cells or mobile vans. Share this information. Talk about it. Make sure people understand what they've signed up for just by having a driver's license in Tennessee. The more people know, the more pressure legislators face to reconsider. And this goes beyond Tennessee. Other states are watching. If Tennessee's law stands unchallenged, if it's upheld by the courts, other states will adopt similar provisions. This will spread. The precedent will be established nationally. But if Tennessee faces enough backlash, if the legal challenges succeed, if legislators face political consequences for supporting it, other states will think twice before going down this road. This is a battle worth fighting. Not because any of us want drunk drivers on the road, but because we understand government power, once granted, is never voluntarily given back. We understand that what starts with DUIs will eventually expand to other crimes. We understand that the principle of forcibly extracting biological evidence from citizens is a fundamental shift in the relationship between individuals and the state. And we understand that if we don't fight back now, if we let this become normalized, we're handing future generations a government with powers our founders never imagined and freedoms they fought for lost forever. Let me bring this all together. The Tennessee DUI law that went into effect on January 1st, 2026, authorizes law enforcement to use physical force to extract blood from suspected impaired drivers. It increases penalties for refusal. It expands the type of testing available. And it does all of this under the legal fiction that driving is a privilege rather than a right. So normal constitutional protections somehow don't fully apply. This is a massive expansion of government power over your physical body. It's a clear violation of the bodily autonomy principle that the left claims to hold sacred. And yet, Where's the outrage from the people who spent years screaming, "My body, my choice"? Nowhere. Because it was never actually about the principle. It was only ever about defending abortion. How come it's only my body, my choice when it's about murdering babies? How come bodily autonomy only matters when it's being used to defend the one thing the left cares about above all else? The hypocrisy is staggering. The same people who opposed vaccine mandates as bodily autonomy violations are silent when the government authorizes police to physically restrain you and extract your blood. The same feminists who built their entire political identity around reproductive choice have nothing to say when choice is being eliminated in other medical contexts. Because they don't actually believe in consistent principles. They believe in political outcomes, and bodily autonomy is just a tool they use when it's convenient and ignore when it's not. This law is dangerous, not just because of what it does now, but because of the precedent it sets. Once you establish that the government can use force to extract biological evidence for one type of crime, expanding that authority to other crimes becomes much easier. Once you normalize the idea that your body is a container for evidence the state can access by force, you have fundamentally changed the relationship between citizens and government. And we need to fight back. Contact your legislators, support legal challenges, raise public awareness, make it clear that this expansion of government power is unacceptable and will have political consequences. Because if we don't stop this now, it's only going to get worse. The power will expand. The precedent will be cited. The next generation will grow up thinking it's normal for the government to forcibly extract biological evidence from citizens, and will have lost something fundamental about what it means to be free. Now, before we wrap up, I want to tell you about something I've been building. A network dedicated to cutting through the lies, the hypocrisy, and the propaganda that the mainstream media and the left are constantly pushing. It's called the Truth in the Darkness Network, and you can find everything at titdusa.com. This is a faith-driven media network bringing you bold truth and biblical clarity on the issues that matter. We're not here to play nice with the cultural narratives or apologize for standing on principle. We're here to confront deception, strengthen believers, and bring biblical wisdom to the chaos of culture, politics, and the stories the mainstream media refuses to touch honestly. We've got multiple podcasts covering different areas, political commentary through Courage in the Darkness, where we tackle exactly the kind of issues that we've been discussing today, daily devotionals through Pillars of Light to ground you in faith, investigate true crime through Buried Truths, uncovering cases the media ignores, and plain English Bible teaching through the Unlocked Bible. That's coming really soon. I promise. I'm working on it. And it's going chapter by chapter through Scripture, breaking it down in plain English. Everything we do is about bringing light into darkness, about telling the truth when everyone else is lying, about standing firm on biblical principles when the culture demands compromise. You can support this work in multiple ways. Listen to the podcasts, share the content, buy merchandise from the shop. Every purchase helps fund independent, uncensored media that refuses to bow to cultural pressure. And if you want to go deeper, we've got membership options that give you access to exclusive content and the ability to be part of a community that's committed to truth. This isn't just another podcast network. This is a mission. We're building something that will stand when everything else crumbles because it's built on the unshakable foundation of God's Word and the commitment to speak truth no matter the cost. Check it out at titdusa.com. Join the community. Stand in the light with us. In Psalm 139, verses 13 through 14, David writes, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." Your body is not the government's property. It's not a container for evidence. It's not subject to forced medical procedures just because bureaucrats decided they need something from you. We were fearfully and wonderfully made by God. You have inherent dignity and worth, and no government law, no matter how well intentioned, should be able to override your bodily autonomy through physical force. Stand up, push back, defend what's right. I'll see you next time.